Welcome to the Freight Project podcast, brought to you by Cerasis, a North American third-party logistics company providing shippers transportation management technology and solutions.
On today's The Freight Project podcast episode, I welcome back Cerasis Implementation Manager Tina Baker to talk about how effective change management aids in TMS adoption. On the episode, you'll hear from Tina, her advice on how she onboards new shipper customers at Cerasis as they make a change to their supply chain. Tina will first answer, what should an organization ask themselves as they onboard any new supply chain technology so they do realize TMS adoption and ultimately gain an ROI from the technology investment. Tina then explains tips on how to overcome the fears of change, fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of peer acceptance, and even the fear of success when looking to onboard freight solutions and get TMS adoption. Finally, Tina will share how those who drive the change at an organization by bringing on new technology or solutions prepares their team to make the onboarding process more seamless. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Freight Project Podcast. Hello, Tina, and thanks for coming back on the Freight Project Podcast. Always enjoy when you're on to give your insights so our listeners can learn about your expertise of implementation as your role of implementation manager here at Cerasis. And today we have you on to speak a little bit more about that role and what you focus on. A part of implementation, a big part of it, is change management. Now, I say change management, although your title is implementation manager, because in an era of profound and accelerating disruption, meaning technological growth, the information age, changes in customer loyalty and their consumption habits, changes all around the global economy and in the business environment, it has really forced organizations to change the way they do business. And really, that's no different when a customer, signs on here at Cerasis. You help them get on board and do everything that they need to do. And they're going to have to change their transportation management processes slightly. They're going to have to effectively communicate to their team how to best use their new TMS that we provide, the Cerasis Rater, so that they see an ROI in our solutions, as well as ensure that adoption occurs in the use of that system so that they see the full benefits from the system. So with all that said, what are some of the basic change management questions that you ask of a new customer at Cerasis, and what should the organization ask themselves as they onboard so they do realize adoption and ultimately ROI from our technology and our solutions?
Hi, Adam. Thank you for having me back. I always enjoy being on your podcasts. That is a very good question because change management is a key part of implementing any project. Most people are afraid to change the status quo, and that's why when you start discussing change, you want to start that discussion right at the beginning of any project. It's very important to start right when you start the project. Two of the first questions I ask are, what do you do today and why do you do it that way? It's really important to understand how every department interacts with the current shipping process, because as we both know that shipping affects all the different aspects of a company. So if you don't understand the current process and why they're doing the process that they do today, you don't know what's going to change when you bring in a new system, and you need to understand how it's going to affect each department. Another question I ask them is, what are you hoping to get out of this implementation? You need to understand what that customer's end goal is, because that helps us to understand how to define the new process and make it the best process for that customer. Kind of give them a very unique approach. Another important question that we need to answer when we're implementing any project is, who is going to be involved in the change management planning process? While it's good to have all levels, upper and middle management on board for the decisions, it's also really important to communicate the process out to all team members. In addition to having management buy-in, we need to have those users who are going to actually be using the system and carrying out the process we define. So we want to talk to them at the beginning and talk through their process, identify the gaps, and make sure it's a company-wide effort.
Yeah, I think that's really key, getting all the players involved, especially those users. That might be one that most people forget about, and those are really important questions, and thank you for sharing that any organization should ask themselves, not just with our Cerasis Radar or becoming a new customer of Cerasis, but with any technology or any solution investment that they need to drive adoption in order to get that ROI. Now, there are some folks in an organization, either part of the buying decision or not, who are more comfortable with the status quo. That is, they don't want to rock the boat with the mentality that, hey, things aren't broken. Why are we making this change? What would you say to those who are not yet ready to make a change to a new solution or a new process?
That is a great point, Adam, and why I ask one of the questions I ask, who will be involved in the change management process? I want to ensure that we have those users involved in the planning phase to encourage their understanding and cooperation. One important thing to point out is that even though we try to involve users and get them to understand the reason why we're changing, many of those end users that are using the actual system don't see the full company-wide big picture. The question, things aren't broken, why are we changing, isn't always true. The end user may not see the company-wide expenses or process gaps that currently exist within other departments. Most companies are bringing Cerasis in to assist with closing those gaps. End users don't always see the ROI if it isn't in their department, and they need to be educated on those. We want to circle back to one of my implementation questions is, what do you want to achieve with this implementation? A clear definition helps to educate everyone.
Okay. Well, I think those are all important. And, I love when things really go back to that fundamental question process that you start in the beginning. And in a way, you're honoring every person in the room. You're not saying, well, I'm sorry you don't see it, but this is how we're doing. You kind of respect that they may not know, and that as a true change management professional or a solutions-based company that we are at Cerasis, that we make sure all folks are heard and that they're on board. So really great insight. And it sounds easy, but it's not always that easy to respect each individual. In fact, it's one of our core values. So it's great to hear we're extending that as we bring new customers on board. So staying in that same thought, though, of resistance to change, often a feeling that comes up in any organizational change might be fear. Now, including the fear of failure, the fear of the unknown, fear of peer acceptance, and even fear of success. However, can you perhaps elaborate on how you continue to assuage those fears from the players a part of this change?
Absolutely. Fear is a real obstacle that everyone needs to overcome during an implementation. And communication is very important with all levels of management and the end user. You cannot communicate enough. We ask the team on the customer side to communicate frequently, positively, and clearly with their team. The more the team of future Cerasis users understand the status of the project, the more prepared they are. We also want to train and have discussions with users to explain to them the changes that are specific to their process and why those changes are taking place. Training and bringing the process changes out in the open help to relieve the fear of the unknown. Making sure that those users know that Cerasis is a partner in this process and we're readily available to assist with any questions, any issues, or even help alleviate their fears.
Well, I got to tell you, as silly as even an allergy test, right? I have, cats, and apparently I'm allergic to them. I started experiencing issues earlier this year. So I went to an allergist and they did a blood test, and I have had fear of what the results might be simply because I didn't know, the anxiety of the unknown. And as soon as those blood tests came in, like all the fears went away. I even was asking myself, what were you afraid of? And it's just interesting that the fear of the unknown can be such a driving force. So it's key, to make sure that we educate those customers, that we extend, that great educational content we put out from the marketing side, not just as a thing to attract customers and make us look cool or sound awesome, but that we're actually doing it because we know that the crux of success with a customer when they come on board is that their people effectively use our system so that they're able to bring efficiency, reduce time shipping, and ultimately reduce costs. So let's get to maybe the final question here that we haven't touched on yet with change management, or, specifically, let's say you have a shipper who is looking to change, is a champion of deploying new shipping solutions on the other side of that person who might want to keep with the status quo, or who has fear. So, they're bringing on the TMS, our Cerasis Radar, or, perhaps they're implementing changes with our solutions, such as how we, get folks set up with new carriers or new rates, or, we're now going to help them take on those freight claims. But maybe they're worried about how it will impact their organization, and maybe they're worried about the initial disruption to their operations. And so maybe that's a reason they're not going to hire a new company. What is something that they can do to make the onboarding process more seamless for their team and be that leader that their internal folks, a part of this change, needs?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because all changes are going to have an impact on an organization, but the key is to keep that impact minimal on the cost and the effort and make it significant for the ROI. The best way to do that is to do the work up front. The initial investment of time to thoughtfully plan out the process, have meetings and discuss the process, and determine what the impact is going to be on all departments and the company as a whole is very important. Adding in communication and brainstorming with those that are going to be affected during the initial gathering of information is key to making this a successful project. The combination of that upfront planning, the communication, the inclusion of the team is going to bring the best ROI on the back end and encourage company-wide understanding of corporate goals.
Yeah. And I think that is key, a little bit of upfront work, and it's interesting, even at Cerasis, we have such great leadership here. And I'll talk a little bit about Lud for a second, one of our co-founders, Steve Ludvigsen. He really challenges each of our managers during our budgeting process when we want to find a solution to consider this implementation part of whatever we bring on board. And I think that's super important. I think this will be a great podcast for us to listen to, all of us. But, any manager, any person who's looking to improve their company and is looking for an outside resource like a Cerasis to improve a process, perhaps like shipping, they really need to consider these things. And I think you've done a really good job of laying out in an easy to follow way the steps and the considerations to effectively have that change put in place, be adopted, and allow it to really shine and give those benefits as promised by the solutions provider that company is looking for. So, Tina, thanks once again for being on the Freight Project podcast and giving these great insights about change management for our listeners. I can't wait to have you on down the line again, as I'm sure we will. So thanks.
Thank you, Adam, for having me, and good luck with your allergies.
Thanks. I'm still working on them, but that's a North Texas thing. So hopefully when you're down here, it is an allergy season and you're not suffering because it can be bad. But for all our listeners of the Freight Project podcast, we thank you for tuning in for every episode, and we hope you all have a great day.